The Sarah Jane Adventures, The Ghost House, by Stephen Cole. Read by Elisabeth Sladen. "5 a.m. I'd lain awake all night and watched the stars fade into the milky pink of the Sunday sunrise. Once I travelled out among those distant stars with the most special friend you could ever imagine. Now I'm settled back in London, I can only gaze up at that star-speckled wilderness, but even that can fill me with wonder enough to keep me from sleep some nights. You see, I've never let go. My travelling days may be over, but I'm still here to greet any visitors to our earthly shores, and they do come, believe me. Some of them are just like I used to be, wide-eyed tourists thrilling to each new encounter. Some of them need help, some are here to cause harm. I take care of them all, however I have to, as best I can. But sometimes I just like to look at the stars in the peace and quiet of my big old house in this leafy West London street, thinking of old friends. As dreary dawnlight stole into my room, I decided to make myself a coffee and do something a little more constructive. A small mountain of paperwork was building on the kitchen table. When you spend every other day saving the world, it's easy to lose track of the little things like paying off your credit cards, and I figured it wouldn't be such a bad thing to come back down to earth for a little while. Some hope. As I reached the kitchen, I heard a crash from outside and a man shouting in alarm. Once a journalist, always a journalist, and with a nose for a story, I wrapped my dressing gown around me and slipped outside into the mild morning. To my left, 100 metres or so along Bannerman Road, a milkman stood in the street, a crate of milk cartons lying in a white puddle on the tarmac beside him. He was staring up at something, his face stretched into an almost comical caricature of disbelief. "Are you all right?" I began, jogging up the street towards him. He jumped, turned to look at me, flustered. "What? Yes, sorry, I'm fine. Just gave me a turn." He started looking around the deserted street. "Where are the cameras, then?" I didn't know what he was talking about. "Cameras? It's amazing what they can do, these telly people," he said, a waver in his voice. "Gave me quite a turn." "What telly people?" I looked around. "There's no one here." "They're filming," he insisted. "I mean, what else could it be?" I suddenly saw just what he was making a fuss about. The house opposite was wrong. It's a bit of a hodgepodge, Bannerman Road. Different houses from different times. A lot of them went up in the 1960s and 70s, replacing the old crumbling Victorian villas. But here, suddenly, impossibly, the march of progress had been reversed. Last night, an ordinary, nondescript family home had stood here, as it had done for years. Now a smart Victorian-looking residence loomed up in its place. A grey slate roof had replaced the cracked mossy red tiles. Bay windows jutted out from the patterned brickwork. The adjoining garage had disappeared. Sash windows split into careful squares had replaced the modern double glazing, framed with wood, not UPVC. A smart door, painted in racing green and topped with a panel of stained glass, stood in place of the expected mass-produced effort. Even the paving on the path leading up to the house was of a different type, grimier but still smarter somehow. There it stood, incongruous and proud, the ghost of housing past, somehow shoehorned into Bannerman Road between number 37 and number 41. "Done it up amazing, haven't they?" the milkman marvelled. "The O'Briens won't recognise it when they come back from holiday." "The owners are away?" I asked him in a daze. They might be my neighbours, but I confess I didn't know them. I try to keep myself to myself. It's safer that way, for everyone. "Gone to Australia for 3 weeks, haven't they?" said the milkman, quite casual by now, as he gave a rueful laugh. "Costing me a fortune they are, cancelling their order." I stepped closer to the new, old pavement. There was a slight shimmer in the air in front of it, almost like a heat haze, a warning to stay back. And yet, through the leaded glass windows of the living room, I could see a flat-screen TV, DVD and surround sound speakers, smiley family portraits on the wall. Only the exterior of the house had changed. Perhaps it was the work of a TV crew. But as I watched, thick lace curtains somehow insinuated themselves at the windows, blocking my view. I took a step back in surprise and nearly tripped over the milkman who was picking up his spilt cartons. He straightened up and smiled at me. "See you." and went back to his milk float. It's extraordinary, the way people just reject the things they can't understand, satisfying themselves with the flimsiest of explanations. But how was I going to explain this away? What was happening to this house, and where would it stop? Even as I watched, thick drapes shimmered into being at the living room window beyond the cream lace curtains. An impenetrable barrier summoned from nowhere. I need that coffee, I told myself. I need to get dressed and get thinking. And then... The unfinished sentence hung in the air like the strange haze in front of this impossible house. As I turned and hurried back to my place, I felt my stomach begin to buzz, my tiredness fade. It was clearly going to be one of those difficult days. The days I live for, and sometimes nearly die for. Mr. Smith, I need you, I called, striding into my attic room. And with his usual drama of steam and sliding brickwork, Mr. Smith duly appeared. My supercomputer, grown from an alien crystal, able to tap into the resources of just about anything, anywhere. When it comes to analysis and insight, there's few to touch him. What can I do for you, Sarah Jane? He inquired in that calm, measured voice. Scan for time anomalies in the local area, I told him. Specifically, number 39 Bannerman Road. He didn't pause to raise an electronic eyebrow, of course. Time anomaly detected. A building constructed in 1865 is now occupying the site of one constructed in 1970. He paused, his usual tangle of geometric shapes spilling and shifting over the screen. Sensor scan of material suggests 19 years have elapsed since assembly. So how come a house from 1884 has turned up in Bannerman Road in the present day? I demanded. The house has been displaced in time. It used to stand on that very site, Mr. Smith informed me. It was demolished in 1969 and a replacement constructed the following year. The O'Briens live there, came a soft voice from the doorway. I turned to find Luke behind me in his pyjamas, his hair mussed up from sleep, a quizzical expression on his face. I heard you talking. Johnny O'Brien goes to my school, but he's away on holiday with his parents. So the milkman tells me, I smiled at Luke. He's my adopted son. Well, that's the official story. In reality, he was grown by aliens as a kind of young human archetype, with incredible mental powers and incredible innocence. Nothing's ever simple in my life except my feelings for him. I told Luke what I knew about the situation. It didn't take long. If the old house has materialised in our street, where's John O'Brien's gone? Luke wondered. Well, Mr. Smith, I asked. I saw inside those windows for a few moments, and it was a perfectly modern living room inside. Is it just the shell of the Victorian house superimposing itself over... I'm detecting active fluctuations in local spatial temporal coordinates, Mr. Smith interrupted. What kind of fluctuations? I demanded. Is this some kind of natural effect, or is something causing it? I don't know, Mr. Smith replied, but the phenomenon is ongoing. Whatever process has been set in motion, it is not yet finished. Could the effect spread beyond the O'Brien's house? I demanded. Quite possibly, was the ominous answer. I felt helpless, my least favourite feeling. Continue scanning, Mr. Smith, I said. Keep me informed of any change in this phenomenon. Oh, and search the net, classified files everywhere, in case there's a mention of a similar situation. Ma'am, said Luke, while we're waiting, that Vorgat defence field emitter you had, could we use it to enclose the O'Brien's house and stop the effect spreading? I'm not sure it has the range, I admitted, but I suppose it would at least keep over-curious passers-by out of the way. I gave it to Rani during that business with Spellman, didn't I? I'll call for her, Luke said brightly. And Clyde told us about this house he lives near that's been condemned. It's got loads of police keep-out tape outside. We could borrow some to stop passers-by bumping into the force field. If we were a normal family, Rani Chandra and Clyde Langer would simply be Luke's school friends. As it is, they both help us defend this world against the unknown, and they're brighter and more resourceful than most adults I know. It's not even 6 a.m, I reminded Luke. You might not get the warmest reception. He just smiled. I'll tell Rani's dad I really need a study buddy. He's a headmaster. He'll be pleased I'm doing my schoolwork on a Sunday, won't he? Enjoy finding out, I told him dryly. Luke was lucky. He didn't have to brave the wrath of Rani's parents. They'd been out late at a party and were dead to the world, so it was Rani herself who came to the door. Luke's news soon had her racing upstairs to get dressed and grab the defence shield. She wants to be a journalist, and I reckon she's got guile and guts enough to make it. Clyde was not impressed by Luke waking him so early, but when he saw Rani in tow, he soon softened and duly went along with his two friends. They borrowed some of the surplus hazard tape from the condemned house down Clyde Street, in a good cause, I'd make sure it was replaced, and then cycled back to Bannerman Road and set it up to stop any early risers from getting too close. "So what's the score?" Clyde wondered. "I mean, fair play, when Earth's invaded by proper nasties like the Bane or the Sladen, but invaded by an old house? What are we supposed to do? Call the local builders?" "It's a temporal anomaly," said Luke gravely. "It's just a boring old house," Clyde retorted. "It's just sitting there." "And we're just standing here," said Rani. "If we're going to get the scoop on this thing, perhaps we need to look a little closer." "That could be really dangerous," said Luke. "Yeah, some 150-year-old geezer in top hat and whiskers could come out and tell you off," joked Clyde. Luke looked puzzled. "Mum said the contents of the house were modern. It's only the outside of the house that's manifested itself in our time." "Well, that's okay then, isn't it? Just a quick look," said Rani, already setting off along the stone-flagged path towards the front door. "Oh, wow," she said a little unsteadily. "It feels really weird. Sort of like you're in a boat and the deck's shifting beneath your feet." She peered in through the kitchen window. "I thought Sarah Jane said the house still had modern stuff inside. I can see a really old pair of scales and a funny tall stand full of metal pots and pans. They don't go with the rest of the stuff at all." "Then the effect is spreading," said Luke anxiously, "affecting the contents of the house as well as the external structure." "Should be interesting when John's parents try to claim on their insurance," Clyde noted. "Please splash the cash, because our house has been replaced by some old Victorian job from 100 years ago." "Rani!" Luke yelled, his fingers stabbing out frantically, but he was pointing at nothing. Rani had vanished. To Rani, however, it was the world around her that seemed to vanish. There was no pain, no sensation, but in the space of a step and a single blink, night had fallen. The air smelled different, sharp, with acrid fumes. She was cold, and the stone pathway had splintered to gravel crunching beneath her feet. The house before her had changed too. Here was the O'Brien's modern residence in all its dull, double-glazed glory. "Guys," she began shakily, and turned to where Clyde and Luke should have been. Instead, she found herself confronted by another world, lit by gaslight. She saw a neat row of uniform Victorian houses, hemmed in by railings, an empty cobblestone street, and the distant echo of hooves clopping from the smoky darkness. It was like standing on the set of some costume drama. Shocked and frightened, she sought shelter in the familiar. The modern front of the house she had passed in the present so many times. But now she could make out a dark, cluttered, old-fashioned room through the thickened glass, an upright piano, the frame of a fireplace, an overstuffed chair, and incongruously, in the middle of it all, a flat-screen TV staring back at her like a dark, glassy eye. "The houses have been switched," she realised. "Switched in time." Then she gasped as the ground hardened underfoot. The sunlight switched back on, and her legs gave way. She overbalanced, fell backwards, and into the arms of Clyde Langer. "Don't worry," he told her with a relieved-looking grin. "I have this effect on women." "You mean you make them feel sick?" Rani teased, clutching her stomach. "Getting there was fine, but coming back felt horrible." "Where did you go?" asked Luke urgently, helping Clyde to steer her away from the house. "You seemed to just disappear like you walked into a trans-map beam or—" "I have to talk to Sarah Jane," said Rani, gently shrugging off the boy's concern and hurrying back down the street. "Right now." But as she ran, she could almost feel the presence of the old, new Victorian house behind, standing grave and proper as a headstone. I was scrolling through the files Mr. Smith had extracted for me. Nothing similar seemed to be happening in any other part of the world. Well, that was something. But then, perhaps it simply hadn't been reported yet. The apparent redecoration overnight of an average family house was hardly going to cause a rush of panicked phone calls to the security forces of the world. The only thing of interest was some cryptic communications traffic from a covert agency in Russia, referring to a criminal who'd escaped that morning from a high-tech phase shift prison. Phase shift. I decided to clutch at straws. That's not a mistranslation of time shift, is it? No, said Mr. Smith heavily. But such a specialist prison implies the criminal could be extraterrestrial in nature. And on the other side of the world, I reminded him. Still, we've got nothing else to go on. Keep scanning for further mentions, just in case. The thump and rush of footsteps on the stairs echoed the pounding of my pulse as Luke, Clyde and Rani burst back into the house. Problem, said Rani breathlessly. Very large. Colossally super big, added Clyde helpfully. The children told me what had happened. Thank goodness you're all right, I breathed. We have to get that house sealed off. Anyone could fall through this... Crack in time? Suggested Clyde. That description is succinct and accurate, said Mr. Smith. A crack in time has opened between today's date and the early hours of November 1884, with number 39 Bannerman Road at its epicentre. But why? I perched on a chair. And why here, right on our doorstep? A trap, said Luke anxiously. Someone after you, Mum, wanting revenge. Rani looked doubtful. Surely, though, if they have the power to do something like this, they could do something way worse than sending you back to Victorian times. It's not just sending back, though, is it? Said Clyde. You said the modern house is messing up that street in the past, like they're swapping places. And you, Rani, I sat up in my chair. You were out of place, but you were sent back here. My scanners detected an energy spike at the time Rani was returned to the present day, Mr. Smith informed us. The energy signatures were in the Sigma spectrum and suggestive of primitive time manipulator technology. Then I felt a chill edge down my backbone. Someone sent Rani back to us through the crack in time deliberately. Yes, he said, someone operating in 1884. Luke was looking worried. But if they have that sort of control over the time anomaly, they must want the two houses to swap places in time. I nodded. Whoever is messing about with time has their own agenda, and they don't want to be disturbed in 1884 while they're going about their business. Rani smiled and rubbed her hands together. Well, that's their tough luck, because we're going to find out what that business is. And if we don't like it, we'll sort 'em out, Clyde agreed, looking at me. Right? I smiled. Right. Sigma beams are inherently unstable, Mr. Smith announced. Unless the fracture in time is repaired swiftly, an explosion of temporal energy will be released that could fragmentize over a century of human existence with cataclysmic results for ongoing life on Earth. The biggest bang in history, I muttered. History itself. I strode out into the sunlight again with Luke and Rani, perturbed by how calm and serene the world seemed around me. It was still quiet. Thank goodness for Sundays. But I knew that the neighbours must soon notice the Victorian house next door. And what then? I looked at the defence shield emitter and shook my head. It wasn't intended to protect as large an area as a house, and besides, I might accidentally trap the next-door neighbours inside the shield. That's a point, I muttered, and called Clyde on my mobile. He was staying behind with Mr. Smith to keep us informed of any further goings-on in the house. Clyde, I need to talk to Mr. Smith about neighbours. My mum tapes neighbours if you missed an episode, Clyde quipped. I didn't rise to it. Ask him if the neighbouring houses are being affected by this crack in time. There was a pause and I heard muffled voices. Apparently not, Clyde reported. It's just that house, quite a precise little area, really. But why focus all this energy on an empty house? Luke muttered. The O'Briens went away to visit John's auntie in Canberra. There's nothing suspicious about them. They're ordinary. Well, their house certainly isn't, I reminded him. OK, Clyde, let me know if Mr. Smith picks up anything that might help. Gotcha. He rang off. Help. I felt I could use some. But while there are big, gung-ho organisations that deal with extraterrestrial threats, I was fairly certain that a house turning inside out through time would be a new one on them all. What would they do? Shoot at it? Even so, I was debating whether or not to involve the big guns when... Mum, said Luke urgently. I think I saw something move inside the house. I looked at him. You're certain? He nodded. It couldn't have been a trick of the light because the refraction index of the glass is... I believe you, I said fondly. Now stay out here with Rani. I'm going inside. But what happened to me could happen to you, Rani warned me. I have to try, I told her. Sonic lipstick at the ready, I psyched myself up and started up the Victorian pathway. I trained the lipstick on the front door lock, oscillating the heavy tumblers, uncertain what I would find on the other side. Clearly, the outside of a house built in 1865 wouldn't match the interior of one built in the 1970s, so I'm coming with you, Luke told me, standing at my elbow. The door swung open with a creak. I glimpsed a small, frail figure the other side, all but lost in shadow despite the sunshine. Then in a moment, it was night, and freezing cold. Luke and I were standing in a draughty entrance hall. A half-moon shone in from outside, its pale light reflected on the pattern-tiled floor. A stuffed big cat stood guard against a cast-iron umbrella stand and an antique bureau. I looked behind to find a modern front door swinging slowly closed behind us. "We've slipped through the crack in time," said Luke tensely. "We're in 1884. "The fixtures and fittings are coming through too," I whispered, picking up a multicoloured golf umbrella from the stand. "But chances are we'll be thrown back like Rani was. Let's make the most of our time." As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I saw a flickering light ghosting at the top of the stairs as shadow shifted over it. Heard raised voices, a woman's voice and a man's, both hoarse and hurting. "Charles, May is not in the house. She's nowhere to be seen." "You're certain?" "Of course I'm certain. I've searched all over the house and so has Clara. Oh, May, my poor sweet May." "Beatrice, behind you, the looking-glass. Clara, what's the meaning of this? Speak, girl, why have you hung that monstrous painting in place of my father's mirror? Well?" Now I heard a quieter voice wobbling with tears. "Begging your pardon, sir, but it wasn't me." "Who else would it have been?" Charles stormed. "Oh, what does a glass matter?" Beatrice's anger was mounting. "May has disappeared." When Charles spoke again, his voice was softer. "Hush, Beatrice. I will search the house myself. Doubtless this is a game May is playing." A pause. "But if you believe you can play games with me, Clara, you will soon be seeking new employers. Now, fetch my wife her smelling salts." "Yes, sir." I could hear the rustle of her skirts as Clara curtsied for her life. "Very good, sir." "For such a mannered society, the Victorians don't seem big on manners," Luke whispered. "Not to their servants," I agreed. "And they won't be to a couple of housebreakers either. Come on, there's so little time. We've got to find out why this is happening, the equipment being used to cause all this, whoever's responsible." I pushed open the heavy oak door and looked in on a room filled with velvet and clutter, the drawing room. The O'Brien's TV sat facing the window. Surround sound speakers sat amid the twee ornaments on the mantelpiece. "Perhaps this is a demonstration of power," Luke suggested quietly. "Someone showing someone else what they can do." With a homemade time machine? I thought hard. I've read reports of Victorian time experiments with mirrors and static electricity. No mention of Sigma beams. Suddenly brightness flared into my eyes. The reek of oil disappeared, and I was back in today. I leaned against an upright piano for support as my legs threatened to buckle. "Luke, are you all right?" "I am," he answered, "but I don't think she is." I turned to find a small, frail figure sat cross-legged on the floor. The shadow I'd glimpsed before was a young girl in a crumpled cotton nightdress, both hands clamped over her eyes so we couldn't see her face, but I could still see the tear streaks that trailed down over her chin and neck. "It's May, isn't it?" said Luke. "The Victorian parents can't find her in their house because she's fallen through the crack in time." I nodded as a dark wooden dresser blurred into view in the corner of the room, a crack that's getting wider all the time. I crouched down beside the little girl. "Your name is May, isn't it?" She didn't answer. "I'm Sarah Jane, and this is Luke. We're going to take you out of this strange place and find a way to take you home to your mum and dad. Is that all right? Will you come with us?" The little girl gave the tiniest nod of her head. I scooped her up and carried her towards the front door. Suddenly it was kicked open right in front of me. May shrieked, half-deafened me, and the figure before me in the doorway cried out too. "Clyde!" "Oh, man!" he groaned, clutching his chest as if to check his heart was still beating. "That took years off me." "Well, little May has had 125-odd years taken off her." I hurried out gratefully into the sunlight, and Luke steered Clyde away from me. "What did you think you were doing kicking open the door like that?" "Coming to your rescue," said Clyde a little sorrowfully. Ronnie said on the phone you'd gone inside and there was a girl's cry and stuff, so... That was very brave, but listen to me, all of you. May was still clutching on tight around my neck. Ronnie came and tried gently to prise her free. From now on, you all stay out and leave this to me. It's dangerous in there. Everywhere's dangerous, Clyde retorted. I mean, if this big-time explosion's going to happen, not in front of the child, I told him, a feeling of panic welling inside. Time's running out, and I haven't managed to salvage a thing from this situation, except pick up poor May there, snatched away in her sleep. I checked my watch. It was close to 7 o'clock. How long did we have? Any time now, the world could be in fragments, with billions of lives lost, and I didn't even know the reason why. I looked at Rani and Clyde. You know, perhaps you two should go home to your families. With all that could happen, you should be with them, not with me. Rani wore a brave little smile on her face. Wake up my parents after they've been out partying with the Board of Governors. Are you crazy? Besides, Clyde shrugged, if this is going to happen, I'd sooner Mum stayed asleep. Didn't know anything about it. And while we're here, there's a chance we can help, Rani noted. Maybe think of something. I mean, for a start, you and Luke stayed in the past longer than I did. What's that about? Perhaps because there were two of us, said Luke. It required more energy to send us back, and that took more time to arrange. Quite possibly. I shook my head angrily. If only we knew who's doing this. Bad man, said May abruptly, her face buried in Rani's shoulder. Bad man, waiting in the spidery place. The spidery place? I turned to her. Where's that, May? Where is it? Is it somewhere in your house? Tried Rani, but the little girl wouldn't be drawn again. She's seen him, I realised. This bad man must be the one we want. Clyde nodded. And if we find the spidery place, we'll find him. Mum, said Luke, if it took more energy to send the two of us back through the split in time, perhaps if we use the Vorgat shield, it might make us even harder to kick out to the present. I nodded and tossed him the device, and it will help keep us safe from this bad man if we find him. When we find him, said Rani hopefully. I nodded. Yes, when. I started to run back to my house. I'm going to talk to Mr. Smith, see if he's got any bright ideas. I looked back at them. Keep out of that house. Do not go in and try to find this thing for yourselves. Understand? Of course they understood me, and of course they were too stubborn, selfless, and wonderful ever to listen. Come on then, Luke, said Clyde. We got the shield thingamy. Let's go. We got the looks, the moves, the style. Well, I have. You can just watch and learn. Mum wouldn't like it, Luke reflected. She won't like it when the world ends before the Hollyoaks omnibus has started either, Clyde pointed out. What's she going to do? Ground you for like 5 minutes before we all go out and smoke? Luke sighed. Suppose the risks we take are irrelevant, since we'll die anyway if we can't stop this alien. We could take May with us, said Rani. Try to take her back to her family. I'm not sure that will work, said Luke. She was inside the house before Mum and I went in, and she was still there when we came back. Anything that belongs in that time is being displaced and sent here to the present. She might hinder us travelling back in time, and even if we could take her back, she wouldn't stay there for long. We'll tag team, yeah? Clyde suggested. Your turn in a sec, Rani. Wait here. Rani sighed. At least I know you won't be long. Just be careful. Luke primed the Vorgat device, and the force shield activated. Clyde looked around anxiously as a yellow sparkling glow surrounded the two of them, following the contours of their bodies. Then they approached the front door. Clyde kicked it open again, though there was no real need, and Luke led the way inside. In a heartbeat, he was back in the moonlit Victorian hallway, Clyde right behind him. The glow of the energy shield spilled unearthly light on their surroundings. Only now there was a slimline radiator on the wall and a plug socket beside it. Honks like a mechanic's garage in here, Clyde remarked, turning up his nose at the smell of paraffin. Shame your shield can't keep out the stink. Shh, Luke whispered. The owners of this house are up. They know May has gone. The man is called Charles Burden, Clyde interrupted. He's an architect or something. His wife's Beatrice. May's their second kid. They had a son called Jack, but he died of scarlet fever. Luke looked confused. Clyde shrugged. Mr. Smith checked out the census to see who was living here. He got the full family tree going on. Charles! Beatrice's high, strained voice sounded from upstairs again. The bed! May's bed! It's wrong! It's changed! There was the shrill ringing of a bell. Clara! Clara! Where are you? She's the servant, Clyde went on, as Luke led the way into the kitchen. Lives in the attic room. Apparently she puts up with them till 1893. Soon there won't be an 1893, said Luke gravely, looking keenly around. It will be fractured, shattered, mangled up with 100 other years. Yeah, all right. Clyde looked around. A microwave sat on a dresser, and an electric cooker failed to fill the hole left by a cooking range. No cobwebs! Luke peered into the cramped scullery where the washing and laundry would be done. No spiders here, either. He pondered. Perhaps May meant the attic? Could that be a spidery place? Worth a look, said Clyde. But how are we going to get past Victoria Mum and her maid? First, you must get past me. Luke recognised the voice, but he still jumped in surprise as he turned around to face a tall, rake-thin man with dark eyes, a chiselled straight nose and an outsized jaw. Charles Burden, architect, Victorian patriarch, and right now a very frightened man, standing in the kitchen doorway in his dressing gown. In one hand he was holding up a sputtering candle stub. In the other he wielded an iron poker. What are you? He whispered hoarsely. When I heard you, I took you for scallywags from the street, but that eldritch glow... It's only a force shield, Luke explained helpfully. Demons! Burden swallowed hard. I do not know what bewitchment you have placed on this house to change its outward shape. He nodded fearfully to the microwave. Nor do I fathom your purpose in replacing my possessions with these unholy instruments of metal and wires. But know you, spirits, I do not fear you. What have you done with my child? It's all right. May's cool, said Clyde. We've got her. She's safe, sorted. You have her? Burden's eyes widened. His pallor grew whiter in the eerie light, and he almost choked. Child of darkness! Is it not enough my son Jack was taken from me? Am I to be found so wanting? Please, spirit, spare me, my sweet May. Return her to my care, I beseech you. We want to, but someone is manipulating local space-time events and won't let us, said Luke seriously. Now, other than us, have you seen any intruders in your house tonight? May said she'd seen him in the spidery place, and I thought maybe... There came a sudden piercing shriek from upstairs. That's Clara! Trembling with fear, Burden stared at Clyde and Luke. Are there more of your vile kind here? Why do you torment me? What do you want with this house? Answer! Come on! Clyde urged Luke. Whatever the maid's screaming about could be the bad man. They both charged forwards out of the kitchen. The force shield knocked Burden aside, sent him crashing into the wall, but neither Luke nor Clyde looked back as they hurtled up the stairs. They found a short, mousy girl, barely older than they were, heaving for breath in a crowded drawing room, her eyes wide and boggling as she stared at a leather and chrome bar stool, incongruous amid the ottomans and plump button-back armchairs. The mistress, she moaned. The mistress, she just disappeared. Then she turned, took in Clyde and Luke standing beside her, enveloped in their eerie yellow glow, and shrieked even louder. Thought girls in this time fainted a lot, Clyde complained. That's most probably a stereotype, Luke assured him. Clyde nodded ruefully. It'd be kinder on the ears, though. Beatrice! It was Burden bellowing from downstairs. Clara, get my Beatrice away from those dark spirits. She's gone, sir. The maid sounded hysterical. Taken by the air itself, taken by devils. Taken by a primitive time manipulator, Luke corrected her, just as Burden appeared behind them in the doorway, wild-eyed. He swung his poker down at them and it bounced off the force shield, jarring his wrist. He dropped the weapon, but his grimace of pain soon hardened into one of defiance. So, you have substance, spirits, said Burden slowly. My blow is weak, but you can be struck. He seemed to find solace in this. Return to me my Beatrice and my May, or I swear to you, evil ones, your retribution will be great. We can't return her, said Luke impatiently. We didn't take her in the first place. Now, we don't have much time. Indeed you do not. Burden grabbed Clara by the hand and hauled her down the stairs. Come with me, girl. We must fly this house of evil. Seek help for our terrors. Pray for the deliverance of my loved ones. They heard the front door slam shut. Oh, I thought he'd never leave. Clyde sighed as a radio alarm clock winked into being in mid-air and clattered to the polished floorboards. The houses are trading places faster and faster, said Luke. Come on, quickly. He took a deep breath. Let's look for answers. In the attic. Sarah Jane? Mr. Smith's voice started up as soon as I rushed through the attic door. The house has been breached. An intruder... Mr. Smith's voice died away. He was probably going to say, an intruder has sneaked in and shut me up. I stared at the doorway and had to stifle a gasp. A large, muscular, humanoid figure, red-skinned and wearing black mesh uniform, was leaning in the doorway, watching me curiously with 3 yellow eyes. What are you doing with him anyway? I think I'm the one should be asking questions, I informed him, keeping my voice steady despite the fear prickling through me. And however I got him, I can trust him to defend me from marauding aliens who enter my life and patronize me unannounced. Fighting talk. The alien seemed amused. Your name's Smith too, isn't it? You have me to disadvantage, I said. Life's easier that way. Anyway, I'm sorry, Smith, but your supercomputer can't even help himself right now. I hacked into his higher access level command center 10 days ago, tapped into his power supply. Piece of cake. Had never noticed a thing. Level 2 defense protocols were all over the place. Some kind of primitive computer virus. Was it? Mr. Smith helps me safeguard this planet, was all I was prepared to tell him. We defend the Earth from invaders, and we help anyone who needs us. He laughed. I could use some help, love. I got a military extraterrestrial containment agency on my back. They had me locked up in a phase shift cage. It's taken me 3 days to alter my electrostatic potential enough to slip free. Frankly, I'm knackered. That report from Russia, I breathed. You're the escaped criminal. It's you that's pulling time inside out from a suburban house. Stay calm, Smith, he said. Getting overexcited never help anybody, and there's things we need to discuss. The alien began to advance. Luke and Clyde were advancing along the landing towards a set of narrow stairs leading up to a small wooden doorway. They stared up at it with foreboding for a few moments. Then Clyde bunched his fists and stalked up the stairs, Luke squeezing up beside him. On the count of 3, Clyde whispered, holding out his shielded, sparkling hand to the door handle. 1, 2... On 3, they shoved open the door. There were no cobwebs or spiders in the cramped little attic. It was scrupulously clean. But a thick shadow seemed to be sitting on the narrow bed, heedless of the sickly light cast by the Vorgat shield. The shadow of a large, spindly creature, possibly humanoid, possibly not. Luke and Clyde watched as it sat there gently shaking, as if with silent laughter. Then abruptly their luminous shield crackled and failed. The floor shifted beneath them, the furniture vanished, the shadow faded into thick, spreading blackness, and all they could hear were their own screams, twisted and echoing as they fell through space. In the present day, Rani was sat uncomfortably with May, fast deciding that babysitters couldn't possibly be paid enough, when suddenly she heard a woman shout and caught a glimpse of movement inside the house. "Hello?" she called. There was no answer. If May can't go back in time, then by holding on to her, I should be safe too, Rani reasoned. And with that, she struggled up with the sobbing girl and threw open the front door. "May!" the woman's voice carried from upstairs, cracked with emotion. "Darling, is that you?" "Mother!" May squealed. Rani hurried up the stairs. It was a Victorian staircase now, Rani noticed, with dark green runners fixed in place by iron stair rods and an ornate banister rail beside it. She scaled it quickly and realised the voice was coming from the bathroom. "Oh, Mother, it's you!" "May!" The distraught woman was kneeling on the bathroom floor. The diamond tiles were loudly Victorian, but the room's avocado suite was very much of the 1980s, not the 1880s. Her dark hair was in disarray, and raw confusion shone in her eyes as she grabbed for her child, clung on tightly. Are you hurt, my darling? Oh, are you hurt? The nice girl looked after me, May told her. Nice girl? Mrs. Burden glared suspiciously at Rani. I do not understand how we came to be here, May. How it is day when it should be night. We cannot be in India, surely. No, said Rani softly. This is England. The woman shook her head, tears in her eyes. This is madness all around me. Your clothes, this hateful bathroom furniture, and yet I picked out this flooring myself. And the windows, they are identical to my own at home. But the view they offer... I don't think you'd believe the explanations, said Rani. And there isn't time anyway. I could disappear from here at any moment. Begone then, Mrs. Burden announced abruptly. It is my belief that this is but a dream, nothing more. I wish it was, Rani retorted. I know this seems mad to you. I know you're upset, but you've got to help me. May said something about a bad man in the spidery place. What did she mean? The woman looked away. I do not care for this dream, girl of India. You are bothersome. Rani fought to stay calm, but with a flash of inspiration, she decided to change tack. You keep a fine house, don't you? I've admired what I've seen of it so far. It's so clean. It's spotless. So when May started on about a spidery place, I couldn't believe it. I mean, a woman of your class, settling for a room full of cobwebs. Mrs. Burden's eyes flashed. You dare to talk of cleanliness in this house of filth? I don't get you, said Rani. Looks pretty clean round here to me. The bathroom is a place of cleanliness and decorum, the woman went on shrilly. And you think to keep a water closet within it? Water closet? Rani frowned. You mean the loo? Then you have an outside loo. That's the spidery place, out in the garden. It was just a silly dare to myself to go there in the night, whispered May. It's then that the spiders get in, you see. Spiders and the bad man. Rani turned on her heel without another word and sprinted down the stairs. As the red-skinned, three-eyed creature continued its advance towards me, I backed away. Mr. Smith, I need you. Yeah, well, I need him more. The creature paused, pulled a handheld device from a pouch in his uniform, and started poking at the controls with thick fingers. Gotta see what's been going on. You can have him back when I've finished. I don't make habit of hijacking other people's hardware, but I needed a high-generation power supply. Didn't fancy my chances in this grotty world, but when I scanned and found your Mr. Smith here, I knew it was just the job. I stared him down, hands on hips. Just the job for destroying the world? What are you on about, Smith? The Russians wouldn't have locked you up if you'd come in peace. Ah, no, you too. The creature looked irritated as he stared down at his controls. That was just a misunderstanding, a glitch in my language appropriation software. I'm not a criminal. I catch criminals. It just came out a bit garbled when they came on heavy with that interrogation. He sighed. Doesn't help that my birth name translates into Russian as something like Death Kill Massacre. He paused. Let's make it Deathy for short, eh? Wait, Deathy, you catch criminals? I stared at him, incredulous. You're a police officer? Technically, I'm more of a bounty hunter, Deathy explained. Legit outfits like that Jadoon have to wait for search warrants before they can enter another world space, and that can take years to sort out on a backwater planet like this. So, better all round if someone like me sneaks in, does job, grabs bad guys and pushes off again. 9 times out of 10, it works out fine. But not this time. I was still trying to decide if he was on the level. Why did you need power from Mr. Smith if not to power this time anomaly? Deathy was defensive. It wasn't an anomaly when I left it, just a simple stasis bubble to hold the scumbag I come for, while I went after his equally scumbaggish partner. Ethnol and Skak, genocidal war criminals from the Bedra elite. They fled the Bedra Fazjak's prime conflict using low-level time technology. It's taken me months to track him down. And when I found Ethanol in Russia, it was on his Todd. I caught him by his slippery. I had to be sure he couldn't escape while I went after Skak. So, I found myself a power supply, located the nearest empty dwelling where I could keep ethanol hidden for a few days, and slung him in the attic in stasis. A kind of time trap. I was starting to understand at last. You trapped him in a moment of time and left him at number 39, a prison maintained by energy siphoned from Mr. Smith. Deathy crossed to Mr. Smith, frowning. I wondered if he'd wised up somehow and was causing the stasis bubble to decay. But no, should have known this is an external attack. A skak attack. He blinked all 3 eyelids at once. It must have been Skak who got me locked up, making sure I was kept busy while he scuttled off and found his partner. And now this Skak is trying to set Ethanol free. I stared at Deathy in alarm. He's attacking the time trap. Just a bit. I told you, love, this pair have access to low-level time technology, Sigma beams, time pumps. The bounty hunter was checking the data display on his gadget again. You can stretch a single moment, what, about 125 years before it breaks? Skak has slipped back to the past so he can do just that. He's turning that stasis bubble inside out, stretching its chronal fabric. Then that's why the modern house and the Victorian house are trading places in time, I realised. They're at opposite ends of the stasis bubble. Deathy nodded. And any time now that bubble will reach shatter point. Ethanol will be released, and he and Skak will ride out the temporal feedback. And Earth will be left devastated, I interrupted. My friends and I, we've been trying to do something about it. Nothing you can do, said Deathy gruffly. Without the proper shielding, Skak can defect you back to the present any time you come through. But you must have the proper shielding, right? I pushed him towards the stairs. So what are you waiting for? Get saving my planet! I practically frog-marched Deathy down the street. He fussed with his long coat collars as we hurried along, trying to disguise his appearance from the thin crowds gathering to watch number 39. But just then, I was past caring what people might think. Local tongues wag about me at the best of times, and this was anything but the best of times. I saw Rani running down the street towards me. She looked frantic. What happened? I demanded. Where's May? With her mum, Rani blurted, skidding to a stop. She's come through too. She's in the bathroom thinking this is all a dream, and her verbal diarrhea dried up as she took in the sight of Deathy. So, Jane? It's all right, Rani, I said. Meet the unwitting cause of all our problems, I said simply, but with the potential to cure them. Why, thank you, said Deathy dryly. Listen, Rani went on, this sounds weird, I know, but May said the bad man in 1884 is hiding in the outside toilet. Deathy looked blank. The what? An external sanitation unit, I told him. Of course, a hiding place outside the stasis bubble, where Skak could hole up while trying to free his partner. May must have surprised him there. I looked at Deathy. Skak's time technology must be in there with him. You must stop him. Go back to the garden at the rear of the house. But Deathy was looking past me down Bannerman Road, and my heart sank at the sight of a police car arriving on the scene with the worst possible timing. The car pulled up and a young police officer got out. He walked across to us. Morning, madam? He glanced at Deathy. Sir? Bit big for fancy dress, aren't we? He turned back to me. We've had reports of youths loitering around this house, behaving in a suspicious fashion. Don't suppose either of you has seen anything? I took a deep breath, but before I could say anything, Deathy was touching a control on his handheld device, and, in a flash, the young policeman had vanished. Furious, I whirled to face the alien. Don't worry, he grinned. He's not hurt. Short-range matter transporter. By now, he'll be very confused and about... He paused to check his device. Yeah, about 2 kilometers that way. He pointed down the road. Oh, very clever, I told him. And what about his colleague? I gestured towards the car. A frightened-looking policewoman was sitting in the passenger seat and was obviously calling in an urgent report. There must have been other patrols in the area. Suddenly, the air was full of sirens, and we saw 2 more police cars racing down Bannerman Road towards us. Deathy turned and ran without another word back towards my house. As brakes screeched and uniform officers chased after him. No! I yelled. "Devi, don't go!" Wildly, I grabbed hold of the policewoman as she ran past. "Stop it! You're chasing away our only chance!" She shrugged me off and hurried after her friends. Then I was distracted by shouts from close by. Luke and Clyde suddenly focused again on the here and now. I turned back to the house and found the two of them lying on their backs on the path outside the house, groaning and gasping for breath. With Ronnie's help, I pulled the boys clear. "What happened?" "We found some weird shadow thing in the attic," Clyde explained. "It seemed to be some kind of alien manifestation," Luke said more precisely. "The ghost of an image." "The image of a galactic criminal named Ethnol," I breathed. "If his shadow is there in 1884, the rest of him can't be far away." "But May and her mum came through in a moment," said Ronnie. "What's taking this Ethnol so long?" "Because he was frozen in time in the attic, here in the present. His accomplice, Skak, is dragging him free. He must have detected you getting close and power-boosted his equipment to kick you out of there hard." "That suggests that Ethnol must still be vulnerable, Mum," Luke realised. Clyde pointed to the slate roof of the house. "Maybe we could make it upstairs to the attic here in this time and sort him out." "No, it's Skak and his time technology that's the real problem," I said. "When the stasis bubble is turned inside out, it'll spit Ethnol out into 1884 and trigger the shatter point. And the boys and girls in blue have just driven away our best chance of stopping it." Luke and Clyde both looked puzzled, but Ronnie shook her head in a "leave it" gesture. I summoned the biggest smile I could. "So, once again, it's left to us talented amateurs." Luke looked dolefully down at the Vorgat defense shield emitter in his hand. "I'm afraid this has shorted out. It can't protect us any more." I grabbed it from him. "It must," I said simply, taking out my sonic lipstick and giving it a good blast. "If I can trigger the reserve relays, it may never recharge again, but it should be good for a few minutes more protection." Ronnie nodded. "Protection because we're going in again, right?" "All of us," I confirmed. 4 of us should make it harder still for Skak to shove us back from past to present, and 4 of us because whatever we face back there in the past, our only chance is if we face it as a team." "I'm in," said Clyde bravely. Ronnie nodded and Luke squeezed my hand. "Then here goes everything," I said. All linking hands, we marched up to the house, threw open the door, and stepped into the darkened hall. My foot caught against the antique umbrella stand. Most of the furniture and decor was modern now, but I hardly noticed as I led the charge through the kitchen into the scullery and unbolted the heavy back door. "Shouldn't you activate the defense shield, Mum?" said Luke. "Not yet." I opened the door and ran out into the wintry chill. The night was just beginning to lift and I could make out the shadowy outbuilding just ahead of me. Luke, Clyde and Ronnie gathered around tensely. We could all hear the quiet, unearthly whir of alien technology coming from within. "Pay dirt," said Clyde. Emphasis on the dirt. There was no time to summon nerve. I yanked on the door handle. The door rattled but wouldn't budge. Hoping to salvage some element of surprise, I buzzed with a sonic lipstick, vibrated the bolt across, and practically tore open the door. A salty stench filled my nostrils, and a spiky creature filled my vision. Skak. He was grey, spindly, and stone-like, covered in slimy fronds like seaweed, with white-crusted barnacles for eyes. With a low, menacing rattle, he thrust a gun-like device towards us. But the next moment that device flew from his fingers. Luke had grabbed the golf umbrella from the stand and whacked Skak's hand aside. The creature lumbered out, lunging for me. I ducked, and Luke swung the umbrella again, aiming for Skak's head. Skak grabbed it, snapped it in two, and reached for Luke's neck. Clyde and I both grabbed hold of his cold, slimy arm and tried to pull him off balance. No good. He shook us both clear. But he'd left his cobwebby base of operations unguarded, and Ronnie was already standing in the doorway, looking helplessly between a whirring suitcase-sized machine inside and the rest of us. What can I do?" she called. Desperately, I rolled over as a stony club-like foot stamped down where my head had been. "Here!" I shouted as I grabbed the defense shield from my pocket and hurled it at her. She caught it with both hands, cupped it, baffled. "You need this, not me." "It's not for you," I yelled back as Luke and Clyde helped me scramble up. "Put it on the machine." Ronnie slammed the shield emitter down on top of Skak's humming, trembling time manipulator, and I activated it with a sonic lipstick. The yellow sparkling glow enveloped the machine at once. "Brilliant," said Ronnie. "Now we can't work the controls." "But the machine is still active," Luke pointed out. His voice sounded suddenly slurred, slowed down. as if the seconds were beginning to thicken around us. I felt blood pounding in my temples. Again, I pointed the lipstick. Not if I can cause the shield to contract. Skak lumbered round to confront his machine, the angry rattle in his throat drowned out by the sound of buckling metal. Weird energy spilled from the cracked casing. The world began to spin around me. With a dread so heavy it hurt, I thought, what if breaking the machine has only made things worse? What if it's not Skak who triggers the shatter point, but me? But then the sluggishness lifted, and there were other, more immediate fears. Skak lurched towards Rani, raising his fist, but then paused at the sound of breaking glass and a loud thud close by in the garden gloom. He looked back and gave a hiss of triumph. On the grass, another large, spindly creature was getting to its slimy feet, its shadow unfurling behind. It had fallen from the attic window. Its white eyes burned bright in the darkness as it opened its O-shaped mouth and gave an exultant, gurgling shriek. "Efnol is free," I whispered. "The stasis bubble is broken. I must have stopped the machine at the second it shattered. But there's so little power left in that shield." Rani's eyes were wild. "When it wears down, the world ends." Skak was ignoring us now, running to embrace his accomplice. They'd cheated justice once before, and now they had done it again. They strode arrogantly past us towards the house, as if we were beneath their notice now. Deathy had said they would ride out the temporal storm, and I couldn't stop them, just as I couldn't stop Shatterpoint. I looked up into the Victorian sky, insignificant, standing on my doorstep, yet so far from home. Only the stars would endure when the maelstrom was released. Only the stars. "So, that's it?" Clyde was hurt and angry. "We just let them walk away from this? Those things go free?" I didn't have a chance to answer because at that moment, as if to remind us whose house had stood here before the O'Brien's residence took its place, Charles Burden burst into the garden, carrying his poker and now gas lamp as well. "The demons must still be here," he shouted over his shoulder, then froze as he almost walked into Efnol and Skak. He'd come looking for devils, and here were the real things barring his way. "So," he rasped, "the two boys who came in visitation now stand revealed in their true forms." Luke turned sharply to Clyde. "He thinks they are us, so get behind me," I hissed. I saw Efnol raise his hand to strike, heard the death rattle build in his throat. "Quickly," Burden screamed, "before Hell's Gates let through any more." And then a dozen other men spilled out through the doorway, armed with sticks and clubs and a righteous faith. Burden had been out recruiting. Fear and loss had stripped away the mannered Victorian veneer. Here was a mob of men striking out at the unknown, as doubtless men would in any time, and Efnol and Skak never knew what hit them. They went down under the sheer weight of the numbers as the men lashed out savagely over and over. "Return my wife to me, you demons!" Burden thundered above the sound of the mob, and the inhuman gurgling of Efnol and Skak, and the wet crunch of blows on alien skin. "Return to me, my child, or we'll slay you both!" Sickened by the sudden violence, I pulled Clyde and Luke into the shadows behind the outhouse, where Rani was already waiting. "There's nothing we can do," I said. "I told you that," said a gruff voice from inside the outhouse. My breath caught in my throat. "Deathy?" Deathy emerged from the spidery place. Luke and Clyde grabbed hold of me in fear, but Rani shook her head. "It's okay. Sarah Jane's cool with him." I faced up to the tall, red bounty hunter. "I know you said I couldn't help, Deathy, but I still had to try." "And you prove me wrong," he said, holding up his little handheld device in one big paw and Skak's buckled, twisted machine in the other. "You held back the shatter point long enough for me to sort things out." I realized the sound of the frenzied attack had stopped. There was no wind, not a sound, as if time had been halted for everything but us. "I thought you'd run out on me," I began. "And miss out on the bounty for those two genocidal maniacs?" Deathy smiled, showing his pointed teeth. "My molecules were still pliable after slipping that phase shift cage, so I disappeared on them. Back to your dwelling. I made a quick scan and found you'd isolated Skak's technology in 1884. Fantastic! and with a little rejigging to reverse the field of the fractured stasis bubble. He beckoned us out from hiding. Straight away I saw the imposing silhouette for the Victorian house back where it should have been, and still as statues before it stood Beatrice Burden and May, caught as if in a life-size photograph. Rani stared, an uncertain smile spreading over her face. Mr. Smith was able to repair the damage to time. No, he only provided the power for Deathy here to put things right, I explained. Just as he provided the power for Deathy to set up the stasis bubble in the first place. I like to clean up after myself when I can. The bounty hunter put down Skak's broken machine, strode up to the tangle of Victorian vigilantes, and started to disentangle the alien war criminals. Dear, oh dear, these two took a pasting. Good job as well. Another few seconds, and they'd have had it away on their toes. Will they recover? Asked Luke softly. Oh yeah, they stand trial, don't you worry. He hauled the two blackened, spindly figures out from the pile and held them by the slimy scruffs of their necks. Well, I can shoot off as easily from here as I can from your town, so I'll be going. Clyde frowned. But we don't belong here. What about us? He shrank back a little as Deathy looked down at him. Sir? You're going back, son. You all are. He smiled. And don't worry, Smith. I left your supercomputer just as you had him. Good luck. Don't get caught again, I told him. And thanks. You too, love, he said softly. Then in the next blink, he was gone with his charges. Time started up again. Calm, well-mannered time. The right seconds in the right order. The frozen forms around us suddenly thawed, and Burden and his bundle of side-whiskered friends fell forward in confusion. Gone! Gasped one of the mob. Vanished, Burden agreed, getting shakily to his feet. We sent them back to the stinking dark that spawned them. But my dearest Beatrice and... Daddy! May's cry of joy warmed the cold stirring of the dawn as she threw herself into her father's arms. Wordlessly, Beatrice staggered forwards and joined them both in a tight embrace. Everything back in its proper place, I murmured, as the world seemed to shimmer and shift around me. I held Luke's hand, and he held Rani's, and Rani, much to Clyde's delight, held Clyde's. And then we were standing in sunshine outside a graceless, dowdy, beautifully 70s house. When they returned home, the O'Briens would never know a thing. Keep-out tape was fluttering around our ankles, and bewildered police officers were gazing at the house uncertainly, including, I was pleased to see, the one Deathy had displaced. I cleared my throat, gave a polite wave to the baffled neighbours I saw peering out of windows across the street, and addressed the police officers. Hello, everyone. I was just passing. I really don't know who that man in fancy dress was. I've never met him before. And I think you'll find this house is locked up tight and nothing's been taken, so really, I'd suggest you forget about this whole business. Why waste your time? Time is too precious, Rani agreed with a secret smile at me. Time is too dodgy, Clyde declared. Do not mess. Is it time for breakfast? Luke asked brightly. I laughed. You know, it's a shame Mr. Smith isn't programmed to cook waffles. We left the noisy neighbours and incredulous police officers behind, walking arm in arm back to mine, exhausted, satisfied, looking forward now to good times ahead. The Sarah Jane Adventures, The Ghost House, was written by Stephen Cole and was read by Elisabeth Sladen. It was produced by Kate Thomas and is published by BBC Audiobooks.